Today's conversation is for the mom who loves Jesus but lies awake at night worrying about her child, wondering where she went wrong and if God is still working. Well, if you've ever walked through a season where your faith felt tested or God felt silent, this conversation may speak to your heart. Dawn Ward is a mom who walked through deep pain with her children and discovered God's grace in the middle of it. Dawn, thank you for joining me today and telling your story, such a strong story about your life, your family and your sons.
Thank you for having me today, Nancy. I look forward to our conversation.
Talk about the hardest season as a mom and the story that goes behind that.
The hardest season. Well, I've been at this for a while now, Nancy. My oldest son is going to be 40 this year. I have one son who's 37 and my daughter's 33. She still lives at home with us. She's on the autism spectrum and she's doing well. She's working and everything, but I don't really have that empty nest. And so I kind of like to talk from that perspective of understanding, what it's like when our more mature kids, those kids that we think should be adulting and should be living their life and mom should be kind of staying out of their business and what it's like when they're not doing well. And for me, it all started with actually it was my middle son and he was 17 at the time. I found out that he was, using drugs and he actually had come to us and told us that he was. And we had raised him at Christian school and a church and just, it wasn't on my radar to look for it. Even though I had noticed his appearance was changing and grades were slipping, it just was the last thing I would have expected. And so when you ask about that hardest moment, I still look back to that moment when I felt like the rug was just ripped out from underneath me and I felt like I didn't have any hope because when I heard drug addiction, I felt like, hey, this is a life sentence. Oh, once an addict, always an addict was kind of the verbiage that was going on around back then. And I had so much fear that he would either end up, in jail, in prison, incarcerated for the rest of his life, or worst case scenario, that he would actually die from it. So I remember that feeling of just despair. And even as a believer, not knowing how to reconcile what was truth with what was the enemy's lies, which was, science and fact that would help me to understand better what was going on. And that was truthfully just the start of our journey as because I said my son had asked for help and we went and got some counseling for him and got some of the necessary resources and it wasn't easy, but over the next few years he really did want hope, want help, got in with a good Christian program and he was able to get his life going the direction that with God's help that he's doing well today, married, happy, has a good career and he's a testimony. We're very grateful. But when it happened about a year and a half later with his older brother, well, by then we thought we had dodged a bullet. We thought, hey, he's in college, he's doing great. He would even beat up his little brother sometimes. Say, I'm going to punch you out for what you're doing to our parents. But he got addicted during the time when he had a major surgery on his stomach, and they were telling us that the medications weren't addictive. And so for him, I think it was just this like mother's milk for him. I think that he had had an ongoing congenital birth defect we weren't aware of until 20s, and it was a stomach condition. Later, I found out my uncle and my cousin both had to have this surgery. And so he had been dealing with anxiety, pain, chronic pain, just a lot of things so that when these pain pills came into his life, he, I think, actually liked them. It wasn't just get out of pain. It became something that he became dependent on and very quickly. And so I think he started to self-medicate in the sense of calming anxiety, helping with depression. Then when we realized there was a problem, and we said, hey, look, we need to take you to the doctor and talk about this. By then, our family doctor said, hey, the medical profession has done you a disservice, and they should have told you that these were addictive substances, and we're seeing a big problem with people getting off of them. And by then, he was taking mental health drugs like benzodiazepines, like Xanax, Ativan, those type of things. So his drug of choice kind of became the opiates and the anti-anxiety medication. And that became kind of a chronic, ongoing issue for us. So when I look now at the low point in my life, I would say the weariness of having those periods where he's doing very well. And then when he does crash, it just seems to take him so much lower and cost him so much more. And as a mother, naturally, you grieve more for the consequences, whether I'm still praying and believing that God will eventually help him really get his aha moment where he says, I can't keep going back to self-medicating and I have to do this the way, I've got to ask doctors for help and I've got to do the things I need to do and I've really got to turn this over to Jesus. But the other side of it is each time this happens, the consequences and the risks become greater. And as a mom, you start to really look back and grieve that loss of what that life could have looked like because of knowing that his talents and his gifts and his humor and his strength. And so to see all of that and realize that he can make one or two bad choices and have it just spiral so quickly, I think has been one of the harder, more difficult times for me to reconcile as I've gone through now almost 20 years of this.
Wow, you seem so calm for somebody who's been going through this for a long time.
Yeah. Part of it was, I remember one time, and this can be, sometimes people come on and they can talk to you about how things really got good, and the Lord did this miracle and their family is doing well. And I'm so grateful to have that testimony for my husband, who was addicted to pain medications as well, with numerous back surgeries, and for my son, my younger son. But then there's that time of reconciling with Lord, I'm not getting that quick answer. And I remember one time my son had sent a note via text to his brother that he was going to end his life. And his brother didn't even know his address. His brother was in medical school. And so what happened was he got a hold of my husband. My husband sent the first responders to my son's apartment. And at the time I was working in a medical office myself. And I just went into this where I just kept seeing my patients. I had my phone on silent, waiting to hear whether my son was dead or alive, and I just kept working. And when I got the call from the police, I just, I saw it was on vibrate. I stepped out of the room, went in, I made an excuse. I even made an excuse to my patient, like I needed to get a supply. I made sure whenever, the craziest thing about coping with this kind of stuff is I made sure that if I ever had to step out due to something like this, and I told them I had to get a supply, I always came back with a supply. Isn't that crazy, Nancy? But I always came back with that cotton or those, whatever it was I needed and that I was low on. So when I was out of the room and I talked to the police and they had found out they'd got him in time and they were taking him to the hospital and all of this, I went right back in and I didn't miss a beat. And I didn't tell anybody that day what had happened. I just continued to see my patients and went for months without ever really identifying what I was feeling. And I remember one day the Lord saying to me, hey, I know what it was. I think it was during the time I was writing my book. And I said, thank you, Lord, for all the strength you gave me and all the times that I went through these crisis situations and I was able to keep it together. And I was truly grateful for that because, I needed a job. I had bills to pay and things. So I was very grateful. But the Lord said to me, he goes, I bet you think you handled that really well, don't you? And he reminded me of that situation. And I said, well, yeah, thank you, Lord. He goes, actually, if there was a time you should have fallen apart and you should have been in a bundle and on the floor of tears, or you should have been driving home or driving to your son's house as quickly as possible, that would have been the day. And he just really told me, like, Dawn, there are times when you have permission to be a mom, to hurt, to be concerned. When I'm afraid, I will trust in you. And what he showed me is I'd been living in that, flight, fight, or freeze when we're that trauma part of our brain. I was so used to, I knew what fight felt like, and I knew what it was like to fight for my child and to fight to try to help him. But when I got into freeze, I didn't even know that I couldn't even recognize it. I didn't realize that what I was doing and coping and thinking was God's strength was truly a trauma response that my body was dealing with. And the Lord really wanted to put his finger on that. And he really wanted to talk to me about, like, Don, are you really relying on me? Or are you just living in this cognitive dissonance, where you just kind of checked out in order to survive?
Hmm.
And that was a process that I had to work through with the Lord because I knew he wanted to take me to a deeper level of trust with him. And that sometimes coping well or seeming like we're coping well isn't necessarily a sign that we're where God wants us to be. That he wants us to be in that complete place. He'd rather have us bawling and sitting on his lap and crying and not even knowing what to do next than pretending everything's okay. And so,
Yes.
and I had to come to that place, because there are times when, yeah, I had to put on a smile on my face and I had to function. There were other times when the Lord showed me that, Dawn, that was a time that I needed you to really be dependent on me. and you were just holding on by a thread and you were just doing the next thing that you needed to do to survive. And there that does happen. I don't want anybody to feel like that's not that's not a real part of it. But it was a place where the Lord, one of those aha moments where I realized like how hard this was really hitting me.
Yeah. You go into, I can see what you mean about freeze, because even if it isn't, we're talking about drug addiction here, and
Right.
what moms can do, and things like that. But whenever we're traumatized, we can go into freeze mode, like not really knowing what to do.
No.
It's just like, okay, I wasn't, how did I receive that? How can I, how am I going to do this? Yeah, and it happens to so many people. But now you have a son now who was drug addicted, and he's now in you say he's in jail now, but you know is he has he come to the Lord? Have Is he seeking God through all this? Is he changed?
I've seen growth in him, and he of all of my kids seems to be the one who stands up the most verbally for his faith. And so I see this side of him that believes and really there's no wavering as far as what he confesses, but then I do see that side that struggles with surrender and allowing the Holy Spirit to come in and take over. And I think part of that could be he just had a recent diagnosis where they did say he has bipolar 1. And I think a lot of times there's just when they're in maybe a manic phase, they might feel like things are better than they really are. And then, of course, when they're depressed, they do the suicidal type thing. And so now I think maybe as he starts to get balanced more and be able to actually look at the seriousness of some of the consequences, I think not that I wanted to make him spiral downward or anything, but I think this is when he's going to really be like, Lord, I have to depend on you because I've made such a mess of things. And that's kind of the place that I think the Lord's trying to take him to, is that I can't just fix this. I can't fix this with another job. I can't fix this with the right relationship. I can't fix this by getting my car fixed and being able to get to work. And I think up until now, everything has been about him thinking there's a way he can fix it. And when you do talk to people who have gone through addiction, and I haven't myself, but I was raised in a home. My father was a functioning alcoholic. I look back now because he went to work every day. They didn't call him alcoholics back then, but the family was really decimated from his drinking and everything. And but I look back now and see every member of my family, the men, were addicted in some way or another. At one point, my brother weighed 900 pounds, so he was struggling with a food addiction. And so I look at this and I see these life controlling issues that they were all dealing with. And I wasn't raised in a Christian home, but I remember being like 4 years old, and the Lord reached down and took my hand and said, hold on to my hand and never let go because you're going to need me for this life. And the Lord himself started to disciple me. I wasn't probably till I was 11 or 12 that I knew what it meant to be born again. But I look back and I see his hand and I think, Lord, where would I have been? What would I have turned to if I didn't have you? It's so easy for me to say, hey, Jesus. And I see people in my life that were hurting that didn't turn to Jesus. And so my son, I see that wrestling going on with him now of knowing it in his head and believing it, but not having that transformation in his heart and life. And my husband and I have even been talking about that lately, like, what will that look like for him to have full reliance, full surrender to Jesus Christ, and what a difference that will make in his life when that day comes.
That's an exciting moment, and
Yes, it
I
will
pray
be.
for that.
Thank
I
you.
pray for that. But there's so many moms, that are struggling with this. And their kids don't know who Christ is. Maybe they're at a place in their life where they're like, you know what? I've prayed to Jesus. Nothing is happening. Why isn't he answering my prayers? You know, why is my kid still doing this? What would you say to them?
Well, my husband and I just had that again. My husband Steve and I just had that discussion this week. It doesn't necessarily go away that we just don't, we get impatient and we get tired and we get weary. Hey, the energy that I had for this 20 years ago isn't this, I don't have that much energy for this 20 years later. You physically don't recover from these episodes where you're called out and there's police and there's ambulances and there's car accidents and there's all these things going on. And your body just doesn't bounce back like it used to. It's stress, and it's just a real thing. And I believe that the earlier we can learn to really lean on Jesus and trust his timing and trust his process, the better. And the sooner that we can take it off of our plate and put it on his plate, the better. That, how does that look? Okay, what does that look like? Because my book is really written from a faith-based perspective. There's a lot of good books out there on science, neuroscience, and all of that. Mine was written from the place of one day the Lord said to me, Dawn, do you trust me? And I thought I did, and I just remember at that point kind of that aha moment of, well, what does trusting him look like? And another thing he said to me was, I have a lot to say about addiction in the Bible. He said, I have a lot to say about everything. There's nothing that you can go through in this life that I don't address in my word. I just need you to get in there and I need you to dig deep. And I need you to see what I say about it. And as a result, the book that I wrote has almost 400 Bible verses in it. And because the Lord is so faithful to address every place that we're hurting, every place that we're lacking. And for me, trusting him, when I said, well, what does it look like to trust you? He said, I want you to start coming to my word, coming to the word for what I'm speaking to you, not trying to get help for your child. I want you to Google Christian moms, help for Christian moms whose children are struggling with addiction, not help for the child who's struggling with addiction. And so for me, he was getting me to the place of, yes, now remember, I'd been going through this. This was probably 10 years ago. I'd been in this 10 years and I was fighting tooth and nail for my children. And, and I was in the process losing my personal relationship with Jesus because every time I was coming to him, it was about my child. And it was about fixing my child. And I was ruminating on fixing, you've got to save your son, you've got to save your son, you've got to save your son. This was just playing like a broken record. So I had to come to an aha moment too. I had to come to my clarity, my rock bottom, where I said, if I claim that nothing else matters, Jesus, you are on the throne of my life. Though you slay me, yet will I trust you. Why am I not living that way? And so trusting him began to be the baby steps that he was giving me of, oh gosh, don't send that text message to your son right now. I want you to sit down and spend some time with me in my word and prayer. Don't go into the word looking for that right Bible verse to send to him, but instead, how, Lord, are you speaking to me? And so that was the process that I had to work through of recognizing that my children had become idols in my life. And what mother doesn't want to save her child? I mean, what mother wouldn't do anything? We would dodge a bullet if it was flying at our kid. So of course we're going to do, we would confront drug dealers. We'd do whatever we had to do to save our child's life if we thought it was going to do it. But the problem with addiction is that they have to really want it themselves. And until they come to that place, you're spinning like and I used to say, I didn't feel like, my friend said she felt like she was on a roller coaster from hell. I said, I feel like I'm a pinball in the middle of the pinball machine and that somebody else is pulling that trigger and that thing's just going ding, 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 ding like this. And I don't know where I'm going to land. And so Jesus said, I'm your solid rock. I want you to land on me. And so this really took me on a journey of the Lord growing my faith. And that's my encouragement, to the moms right now. My message to them would be, Mom, yes, anytime, you feel like the Lord's opening a door and showing you an opportunity that perhaps you could speak truth into your child's life, or, hey, there's this opportunity you think that you should at least present to them, do that. But don't get caught up in the rescuing and the enabling and throwing good money after the bad and all of that. I just got duped recently, Nancy. I could just, 20 years, I think I'd know this stuff better, but my husband, my son has a significant other, a girlfriend he's engaged to, and so there's a lot of dynamics that go on there with when it's not just mom and dad anymore. We're talking about adults here, and sometimes, like you were saying, there's significant others, there's children, there's wives, there's other people involved, and that are all part of the solution or all part of the problem. And in this case, he was using an excuse of her car being broken down, which it was. I knew, and my brother had sold her the car, so I knew the situation. And that her son, they were out of money for food for her son and everything. And I ended up sending him money. And after this last chain of events, and he's in jail now, I was talking to her and found out that she never got any of the money. He'd
Oh,
taken the money and gone out and bought drugs with it. And it broke my heart, because I wanted her to have that money to help her. And it was one of those things where I thought, gosh, now I've got to remember if I'm going to do that to go to the other person and make sure it's okay and give them and your brain just gets so tired. And sometimes the Lord's just like, Dawn, I'm looking at your heart. Your heart wasn't to enable him. Your heart was to help the family. And I think we just sometimes have to allow God to give us, that's why my book's called From Guilt to Grace, because I got caught up so much in the guilt and the mistakes I was making. And it hurts my heart when I think about the moms and the dads who are caught up in that level of guilt. And Jesus is just like, I'm about grace. My grace is sufficient. And you're weak. My power is made perfect in your weakness. And you're going to make mistakes, mom. Even it doesn't matter how many counseling sessions you get. It doesn't matter how much you pray. It doesn't matter how many times you mess up. It's going to happen because we are imperfect people. And we have a perfect God, a perfect Father who loves us. And his kids mess up and his kids rebel and his kids sin. And if he of all people understands that you can do everything right and your children still are going to do their own thing. And so that would be my encouragement, because I know what it feels like to still think, gosh, by now I shouldn't be making those same mistakes. I shouldn't, and I do a pretty good job over and over, but my husband and I don't even make the decisions without each other. We both decided it together and still got duped. So I can laugh a little bit about it because it's like a costly mistake, but it happens. Give yourselves a break.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people definitely have that guilt of blaming themselves,
Yes.
because I do know of someone who lost their son to drugs and still feeling very guilty like about it. And
Yes.
it's hard. I don't. I can't even, I don't even step into those shoes to
Right.
understand it. But you know what I love about you is that you are listening to God and you are like writing this down. And would you say to some, maybe mom or parents, you know, do some journaling to the Lord?
Yes.
Maybe this would help you on your journey. Would that help? Have you done that?
I have. During the time I was writing my book, I had a hand injury. I was working for 25 years in the medical profession for plastic surgery and dermatology. I was a medical esthetician. And so my hands needed to do all kinds of fine detail work with needles and lasers and blades and things like that. And I had a hand injury and a surgery, and my thumb ended up actually freezing in place. And so I lost my career over that. And during that time, it was really hard because I was writing the book and I was so used to getting up and journaling. And now I had a hand that was put in a brace, and it was, for about a year there, I had to relearn how to write. And it doesn't even look like my handwriting anymore. But I read recently how healing it is to our brain to actually pick up pen and paper and write. And it activates a different part of the brain than texting or typing, or keyboarding. It actually can help prevent or slow down people who are getting dementia because it helps the brain to actually heal and process. There's something very therapeutic. So even if I find there's times I'm just doodling, like I'm just praying, and I look down and there's a lot of little flowers. They don't even look like flowers. I don't know what they look like, but they're just doodling. And then I'll just put a few little things, like a few notes on there, but about 15 minutes a day. So I thought, isn't that just like, the Lord to have something that we can benefit from spiritually, but also for it to be good for our mind and good for our brain. And it truly does help reset the brain. So I do encourage journaling. And I found that a lot of what I wrote when I was journaling is what the Lord ended up building on when I put it in the book, when He had me put it in the book. And another thing was when I first started the ministry for Christian moms of addicted children, He had me get up every morning, and what I was writing is what I was sharing with them. And I was sharing with them whatever the Lord was revealing to me. So, moms and dads, He will speak to you in those quiet moments. He will speak to you if you just have that pen and paper in your hand and you just pen whatever it is you're worrying about, whatever it is you're concerned about, and let him speak to you, I promise he will be there.
Yeah. And can you give an encouraging word if someone is spiraling right now because their child is going through this?
I can. The scripture that stands out to me that I hold on to is Hebrews 4:16. And it says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and grace to help in time of need." And my encouragement to them is get support. I personally needed Christian sisters in the Lord who understood, and that's why the Lord had me have a Facebook group of women who can pray for each other and encourage each other, pray for their children, glorify the Lord. And then this verse, that word mercy and that word grace, that unmerited favor and yet the mercy of God just to pour out his loving kindness in us when we're hurting and we're broken. And so don't try to do it alone. Get the encouragement you need, and whatever you need for support, be sure and get that. But go to Jesus, run to him over and over and over again. I promise he'll be there for you.
Wonderful. And everyone, this is the book From Guilt to Grace, Hope and Healing for Christian Moms of Addicted Children. And so, Dawn was just talking about her Facebook group. Dawn, where can they get this book, which will help them, you know, kind of just navigate what to do and find out about the Facebook group or anything else or your website?
Yes. So the website is thefaithtoflourish.com. So, or you can go to dawnrward.com. Either one will take you to The Faith to Flourish, and it will have the book there. There's a tab in there for moms whose children are struggling or women whose loved ones are struggling with addiction that has all of that. They can also find me on social media under The Faith to Flourish or Dawn R. Ward, and I'll be on Instagram and Facebook, LinkedIn, those places.
Great. And what would you like to leave my audience with today?
I want to leave them with please don't ever lose hope. God's timing is perfect. He loves your child more than you love your child. If this is even a child situation, if it's your spouse, if you have another member of your family who's struggling in any way, and that just seems to be consuming you and causing you fear, take them to Jesus. And above everything else, let Jesus heal you. Let Jesus encourage you. Let Jesus love on you because he loves you more than you know.
Well, I hope you were blessed by this conversation and reminded that God is still working in your life. And be sure to come back next time for more faith filled conversations here on the call. See you then.